Hello, fellow students and YouTubers. This is actually a redo video. On the video, What is a Sonata? I decided to redo the video because I wasn't happy with that recording, so I will be taking that video down and putting this one up on my page instead. Anyway, so let's get right to it. What is a sonata? Let's first go over sonata form. Sonata Form uses a specific set of rules, or rather, a specific set of sections in a piece of music. So the first section of a sonata is called the exposition. It is played. It is played twice, actually. The exposition is played twice. You play the exposition, you go to the repeat, and then you go all the way back to the beginning in the Baroque era and classical sonatas and some of the Romantic sonatas. It is followed by the development section, which is not repeated. And then after the development section, there is the recapitulation, which is also usually not repeated. And after the recap is the coda, which is the ending of the sonata, also not repeated. However, Beethoven is probably the most famous composer for the piano sonata. He repeats the exposition and the development and the recapitulation and coda in his very famous Appassionata sonata in the third movement, which follows sonata form. So in the third movement, he doesn't repeat the exposition. He instead repeats the development, recapitulation, and coda. This is pretty rare and uncommon. Anyway, so let's talk about what the sections are. So the first section I said is the exposition. During the exposition, the composer will introduce the main theme and some supporting themes that go along with the main theme, okay? So you will hear a main idea or melody and supporting ideas that support the melody and also sometimes contrast the melody, but in a way still complement it overall. Remember that this section, at least in the Baroque and classical, and sometimes in the Romantic era, is always repeated. After the exposition, we have the development. The development is where the composer takes the main theme and the supporting theme, and they develop the themes. Like you develop a picture or a painting or a story or a recipe. So, let's use a recipe. If you first used vanilla and if you first made a vanilla cake, let's say in the development, you make vanilla cake with raspberry swirl. So the composer takes the vanilla and adds a little bit more to it and paints a different picture almost. It's still the same idea, but it's usually more expressive and sometimes more technically demanding too, because maybe you swirl in raspberry and then let's say you swirl in chocolate. So now you have a very complex cake. You started with vanilla in the exposition. Now you have introduced raspberry and chocolate to the mixture. And now you have this vanilla raspberry chocolate swirl cake, which is now the development is the different colors and different flavors that the composer is expanding on his ideas, just like you would a story. If you have an idea for a story, you don't want to just stay in one spot. You want to expand on it. Or if you're an artist, you don't want to just paint one part of the picture. You want to add several different parts to the picture. That's a development. The recapitulation section is always followed after the development. So it's development and then recapitulation. The recapitulation is where the composer actually goes back to the main themes and ideas and restores them in their original form and original key. And it's the recap is really cool because when you're learning a sonata, it might seem overwhelming, but if you think about it, the recapitulation is repeated material. So it's like you're playing the same thing again, but usually in the restored home key. Say if your sonata is in C major, the recapitulation is in C major. All right, and then the coda is the ending. Depending on the composer, the coda can be very, very short, almost next to nothing. But again, Beethoven, as he started to develop his sonatas, and his middle period and later sonatas, the codas are very, very big and sometimes really, really, really demanding. That means they're very difficult. So also, let's just go back because I mentioned something about the recapitulation being in the home key, and I didn't explain what that means fully. During the exposition, say if you're in the key of C major, sonata number whatever in C, usually the exposition ends in the dominant key, major or minor. So if you're in the key of C, you start the exposition, then you end in the key of G. So if you think about the circle of fifths, C is here and G is there. So the sonata will start in the key of C and then modulate and transpose to the key of G. Then you hit your repeat sign and you go back and you do both again. When you play the recapitulation section, it stays in the tonic key C. It doesn't usually waver back and forth between keys. The development will go between different keys. Okay, so now let's talk about different different. I lost my train of thought. Let's talk about. I don't know how to explain it. Sorry. What type of pieces? Sorry, use sonata form. Okay, so piano sonatas are very famous. Piano sonatas use sonata form. The sonata form is almost always at the beginning movement and at the ending movement. Sometimes the ending movement might be a rondo or a presto, which doesn't necessarily follow sonata form. But what usually happens is that at least the first movement follows sonata form. So there's piano sonatas, there are cello sonatas, there are violin and flute, you name it, it has a sonata. If it's not just a piano sonata, say it's an oboe sonata, usually the oboe will be accompanied by the piano. So it's like a sonata for oboe and piano, but the oboe is the featured instrument. So chamber music. Chamber music means small ensemble. When you hear the words, when you hear someone say chamber music, they mean small ensemble. Chamber music uses sonata form. So we're talking about trios and quartets and octets and septets. Symphonies, big, large symphonies, also use sonata form. And like the quartet and the trio, the symphony usually consists of four movements, not three. Solo piano sonatas usually only consist of three movements. Larger scale works and chamber music usually consist of four movements. During the first and fourth movement of either a chamber ensemble or large ensemble, the sonata form is repeated in both the first and last movements. Not always, but most of the time. The middle two movements might be an adagio or a minuet or a rondo or sometimes a scherzo, smaller little pieces, and then the outer movements are usually the bigger works. Concertos also use sonata form. Typically, concertos are in three movements, though they can be in four. It's not very common. The most popular concerto would be the piano or the violin concerto. Now, a concerto is where the featured instrument, like the piano, plays along with large ensemble, like a symphony, and they play together. So it's a full orchestra plus the piano, or full orchestra plus the violin. The violin or piano or cello, there's every type of sonata. There's guitar sonatas. Wynton Marsalis is premiering or has premiered recently a saxophone sonata. That's a saxophone concerto, sorry, for the first time in history ever. So, there's all kinds of types of concertos. So it's a featured instrument and a full orchestra. Sometimes it could be two instruments and a full orchestra. There are triple concertos where it's three instruments. Beethoven's Triple Concerto in C, Opus 56. Not my favorite work of his, but he did write a triple concerto. Mozart famously wrote duo concertos. I probably wrote triple concertos. I'd have to look that up. So a piano concerto, like I said, or a cello concerto. First movement, sonata form. Second movement is usually a slower piece, and the third movement is usually the fastest piece. It may or may not be in sonata form during a concerto. All right, so let's review. Sonata form is exposition, development, Recapitulation, coda. The exposition is repeated during the Baroque, Classical, and some of the Romantic era. And sonata form applies to small ensemble, chamber music, and large ensemble, concertos, and symphonies. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below in the comment section. Thank you for your time today, and I hope that you found this video to be educational. Thank you. Bye-bye.